I wanted to speak a little bit about Bodhidharma on this day, on this week, when we remember him. In a way, he's hard to forget because he's such a figure, right? Every time you bump into a painting, it's, oh, right. In fact, he's such a figure that I think we can forget when we spot him how intimately connected we are to him. He can start to feel like a character who's over there. But in fact, our relationship with him is very intimate. Some of you have heard me talk about him. I have so much to say. And it's hard for me on a day like today to choose the angle. But what I want to try to articulate, at least from one angle, and there are many, is something about what he means. We don't know who he was, of course, because we don't know if he was. There's debate about whether Bodhidharma, this person, ever really existed. We understand there are records that show that at the time about when we say that Bodhidharma was in China, that there was at least one Indian monk in China named Bodhidharma. But that's not very compelling because A, this is a time in history when a lot of monks were coming from India to China. They were very well received. That's part of the story. China was still trying to kind of figure out its own relationship to Buddhism, and it had a bit of a complex about what was authentic. And so when an Indian monk would arrive, they were really taken in. So there was a lot of incentive for someone to do this. And the name Bodhidharma, if you think about it for a moment, is the least extraordinary name. It's just Bodhi and Dharma. So there were probably a lot of Indian monks named Bodhidharma. So maybe it was him. Or maybe he was made up. But the refrain that I hear over and over is that if he was made up because we needed him. I was going to say he explains something. It's that by having a character like him who is so fully formed in the moment that he arrives, we're able to mark a sharp turn in the lineage. We say the Bodhidharma was the 28th in line from the Buddha. And the truth of it is that Buddhism was evolving and changing and tweaking itself for the 1,000 years between the time of the Buddha and Bodhidharma, and in all sorts of ways, both in India and in China. About halfway in between there, we start to see this thing taking form that we come to call the Mahayana, which includes the idea of the Bodhisattva, which includes the idea of universal karmic responsibility. And then those ideas explode and all sorts of new ideas come in. And there's a cosmic element, right? And suddenly we have not just Buddhas, but we have these bodhisattvas that have a real presence in the tradition as figures. So all of this is happening, and it's happening incrementally. It's happening in ways that from generation to generation might not seem so extreme. But then we have this character of Bodhidharma, who in the story makes it feel almost as if he's the line between before and after, right? Something's happening and it looks like one thing, and then from his moment, now it looks like another. I don't think that's how it was. But in a way, it doesn't matter that I don't think that's what it was, because that's the story that this tradition has told itself for all the generations since. And so we can't remove ourselves, we can't remove where we are in this history from this group agreed upon story that there was this man, this extraordinary man, who revealed the practice to be something entirely unlike what people thought it was before. And what was that? Well, first we look to the Buddha, because these two characters kind of stand next to each other, Buddha and Bodhidharma. And for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's really useful to consider the Buddha as someone who was trying to kind of shed light on reality. He introduced these teachings, many of which had a kind of psychological element. And he said, these things are true, and they're always true. And you can know that they're true. And in many cases, he presented them in lists. You could memorize the list. You could know that something had 3 elements or 12 elements. And if you were a follower of his, or if you were 1 generation or 10 generations later, you could sit around with fellow practitioners and you could say, well, if this is true, maybe something else is true. And so there's this slow expansion of what is presented as knowledge, not just as knowledge, but as unshakable knowledge about reality, about the human condition, about the way the world works. He also, I think importantly for this conversation, is understood as such a nice guy. The Buddha was so nice. We look at the statues of him. We don't have statues of the Buddha looking wrathful. We don't have statues of the Buddha looking grumpy. He looks so calm. Everything's okay. To look at the Buddha's face and to feel what he's feeling is to feel that the world is fine. It's so soft. It's so compassionate. And we're made to understand that when he was alive, that people would meet him on the road and give up their former lives simply upon encountering him. They would meet him, they would see his face, they would feel his energy, and they would say, you know what? I'm just going to get in line behind you. I'm going to shave my head, I'm going to put on robes, and I'm going to take on this new life. And he would bow and he would say, welcome. Join me. You all can join me. It's warm. And then when people would go to him with a problem, they would say, I don't understand this. I don't know what to do with this. And the Buddha, because he had done this work and because he was studying these things in such a scientific way, would say, I have an answer for you. I can help you with that thing. He was a doctor, a confident doctor. And you could trust when you went to him that he knew what medicine you needed and that you would understand the medicine as you received it. That's the tradition that starts with the Buddha, and that's the tradition that is evolving, that is being inherited from generation to generation to generation. Zen begins with this other guy. This guy who is presented as being very rough. And similar to how there are no wrathful or grumpy pictures of the Buddha, we really don't have those super calm, gentle images of Bodhidharma. He looks a little bit irritated that you showed up at all, right? Most of the images of Bodhidharma look like you're interrupting him, right? There are very few, there are very few in which he's even looking directly at the audience. It's usually that he's looking away and then he's saying, "What?" So we're self-conscious from the beginning. It's not soft, it's not gentle, it's not warm. It's weirdly off-putting. So even though I tell his stories a lot, I'm going to tell a couple again because we need to think about these stories, to think about where he fits. And the first one is Bodhidharma arrives in China and he has risked his life crossing oceans to come. We never know why. We have koans, koan after koan, in which a monk goes to another monk and says, "Why did Bodhidharma come from the West?" And all sorts of things come from that. Because at the end of the day, yeah, why? He comes from India, he arrives in China, and he is brought before the emperor. In the dedication that I read now, they called it the Liang court. In most of the renditions I read, they refer to Emperor Wu. I'm not really sure how to distinguish these characters. He goes to the emperor, he's brought to the emperor because, again, an Indian monk has shown up. This is a big deal. And this emperor, who is such a patron of Buddhism, is so excited to show him everything he's done to support Buddhism in China, to support the monastic community. He has sponsored monasteries, he has built stupas, he has had gold Buddha statues made, he's had texts copied. He walks around with Bodhidharma and he says, "Look at this, look at this, look at this," gives him the whole tour. And Bodhidharma is silent. And at the end of the tour, the emperor turns to him and says, "So, this is what I've done. How much merit do you think I get?" And Bodhidharma says, "Nothing. You get nothing. Zero." And the emperor is offended. He's upset. He's confused. This is not how this was supposed to go. And in that kind of flustered moment, he says, "Who even are you?" And Bodhidharma says, with absolute sincerity, "I don't know." And that phrase, "I don't know," marks the pivot. That's the moment that this thing that we call Zen starts to identify itself as being a slightly different path. I think we can be confident that if the emperor had had some sort of similar exchange with the Buddha, who, by the way, might also have said, "Sorry, no merit," I don't know. If the emperor had then said, "Who are you?" I think the Buddha would have answered. In fact, we know he might have said a lot. He had a lot to say. But he wasn't one to say, I don't know. Not like that. I think it's important too. It wasn't just that he was presented with some sort of Dharma question and said, I don't know. He was asked a very direct, personal question about his reality. And wouldn't you think that this master, this Buddhist master, would know who he was? He says, I don't know that. And in that unsatisfying space, he walks away. He goes to a cave. He could have uh, he could have had a really opulent life. He could have been the abbot of a big monastery. He could have been taken care of. But instead, he goes into a cave and he pursues a singular practice of zazen, what we would call zazen now. He faces a wall and he sits still. And with no object of mind, he breathes. And he does it for 9 years. And the legend goes that along the way, he cut off his own eyelids so that he would not fall asleep. Leaving him with this bulging appearance. And of course, everybody knows that he's there. Everybody knows that he's in this cave. The monks down at Shaolin, they all talk about him. There's this crazy Indian monk. And if you go to that cave and you look inside, you can just see that he's sitting there and he's always sitting there. He never moves. And they go up sometimes and they look. And some are probably afraid of him, and some of them probably think he's some sort of wizard. He doesn't make sense. He doesn't fit the paradigm. And among this pool of monks who become fascinated with him, we have this one character, Huiko, about whom we don't know very much, but we're told that he carried a great suffering. We don't know why. Some versions of the story might speculate as to why. But we're left to guess what someone in that moment, in that age, might have experienced. What kind of loss, what kind of pain that would drive him to despair, that would drive him probably to choose to become a monk at all over some other life, to try to figure something out. And then to still be unsatisfied, to still be so unsettled. And somewhere along the way, he becomes convinced that Bodhidharma can help, that this teacher, who in his way seems so clearly to know exactly what he is doing, he must know the thing that matters. So Huiko goes back again and again, and he waits for Bodhidharma to come out, and Bodhidharma never comes out. And we arrive at this pivotal moment. It's snowing outside, and it's been snowing for hours, and Huiko has been standing there with the snow piling up and up and up, and still nothing. And he reaches a tipping point, and when he does, he finally does the thing that he had already resolved that he was willing to do, which is that he pulls out a hatchet and he cuts off his own arm. And he walks into the cave and he throws his arm down in front of Bodhidharma, who's facing this wall, and still Bodhidharma does not move. Huiko is so desperate now. He says, I need you to pacify my mind. And for the first time, Bodhidharma finally speaks. And he says, okay, I'll do that for you. Show me your mind, and I will pacify it. And Huiko stands there, and he goes deep into who he is. He searches everywhere. Everywhere. And finally he says, I don't know how. I go looking for it and I can't find it. And Bodhidharma finally turns and looks at him and says, there, I've pacified it for you. And Huiko knows that that's true. And what matters in this story, what has driven us for 1500 years in one particular direction, is that all of this rests on that I don't know. That instead of giving him an answer, Bodhidharma gave him a question. A seemingly impossible question. A seemingly impossible task. And Huiko, in his sincerity, took it up, not as an impossible thing, but as a real question, as a real task. And he found something so much bigger than any answer someone could have given him. Not one he could have explained, not one he could have written an essay about, not one he could have made sense of for someone else, but one that was true. And he knew it was true. The Buddha and Bodhidharma both spoke to things that were true for everyone. They just ask us to look in different ways. The Buddha, in many respects, says, step back and consider this, this, and this. And when you do that, you'll see things in a clearer light. Bodhidharma says, come into this dark, dark cave where there is no safe place, where nothing is certain and nothing is clear. And you'll find the same thing. It's not that one is better than the other. Bodhidharma is the inheritor of what the Buddha gave, which means we inherit all that the Buddha gave. But we walk on this strange path that is never really fully lit, where we're told to figure out how to navigate the dark, how to navigate not knowing. Not so that we one day do know, but so that we can live with never knowing. That's what Bodhidharma gave. That's why we honor him today and every day. It's why we give him fruit. And that's where I'll stop.